I'm Brenda Staudenmaier, the Wisconsin mom who sued the US EPA over fluorosilicic acid chemicals added to the public drinking water supply. I want to debunk Nina Harms's statement to the DeForest Village Board on Tuesday, May 19th. Nina, with respect, your statement to the DeForest Village Board perfectly illustrates a major problem in modern scientific discourse: people confusing institutional consensus with settled science. You opened your statement by explaining to the public what facts, hypotheses, and theories are, yet much of your own testimony blurred those exact distinctions. You stated the facts are fluoride in municipal water system prevents tooth decay. No, that is not a fact in the strict scientific sense. It is a public health claim based largely on observational data, ecological comparisons, historical correlations, and studies conducted by researchers who were often directly invested in proving the success of fluoridation programs. Those are not the same as high quality casual evidence. In evidence based medicine, the gold standard for proving efficacy is the randomized controlled trial. Community water fluoridation has existed for roughly 80 years, yet there has never been a completed, blinded, randomized controlled trial demonstrating that ingesting fluoridated water meaningfully reduces tooth decay across populations. That is extraordinary. If a pharmaceutical company tried to market a drug to the entire population without robust, blinded, randomized controlled trial evidence proving effectiveness and long term safety, scientists would object immediately. Yet, with fluoridation, the absence of gold standard evidence is often ignored because the policy became institutionalized decades ago. You referenced exhaustive peer reviewed research, but quantity of papers is not synonymous with quality of evidence. Thousands of weak studies do not magically become strong science through repetition. Even the Cochrane collaboration, one of the most respected evidence reviewed organizations in the world, found that fluoridation literature to be remarkably weak. The 2015 Cochrane Review concluded that most fluoridation studies were conducted prior to 1975, carried high risk of bias, and were insufficient to confidently determine effectiveness in modern populations, including fluoridated toothpaste and widespread dental care. The authors specifically noted that the evidence quality was low. That is not a fringe position. That is Cochrane. Then in 2024, Cochrane again reviewed fluoridation evidence and found only modest reductions in tooth decay, with estimated benefits in permanent teeth being very small in modern settings. This is a far cry from the dramatic public health miracle often portrayed to the public. So when you say the facts are, what you are actually presenting is an interpretation of incomplete and historically weak evidence. That distinction matters. And there is an even deeper scientific issue that is almost never addressed in these discussions: confounding variables. Many of the historical fluoridation studies did not adequately control for other major drivers of declining tooth decay rates over the same time period. Among the most significant of these is lead exposure. Lead is strongly associated with dental decay. It interferes with enamel formation, disrupts calcium metabolism, and impairs proper tooth mineralization during development. As lead exposure in the United States dramatically declined due to the removal of leaded gasoline, lead paint regulation, plumbing changes, and broader environmental controls, tooth decay rates also declined nationally. Yet many fluoridation studies did not isolate or control for that simultaneous reduction in lead exposure. So the central causal question remains unresolved in those data sets. How much of the observed decline in tooth decay was attributed to fluoride versus the removal of a known tooth damaging toxicant occurring at the same time? That's not a minor methodological detail, it's a fundamental confounding variable. The same issue applies to other naturally occurring minerals such as strontium, which has been associated in some studies with reduced caries risk depending on geological exposure. Early fluoridation comparisons often involved entirely different cities with different water mineral profiles, industrial exposures, dietary patterns, socioeconomic conditions, and dental care access. So, again, how was strontium controlled for in these early studies? In many cases, it was not, which brings us back to the core scientific principle: correlation is not causation, especially when multiple influential variables are changing simultaneously. You also stated that fluoride levels are carefully monitored to prevent overdose. But this statement oversimplifies the issue to the point of being misleading. Water systems monitor concentration in water. They do not and cannot control individual dose. Dose varies enormously depending on how much water a person drinks, body weight, kidney function, infant formula consumption, occupational exposure, tea intake, dental products, processed beverages, medications, and total lifetime accumulation. This is one of the central scientific criticisms of fluoridation. It is impossible to precisely control individual exposure in a population wide dosing system. The National Toxicology Program has also acknowledged that modern fluoride exposure comes from multiple sources and that urinary fluoride measurements in some optimally fluoridated populations overlap with levels associated with neurodevelopmental concerns in several studies. That matters because fluoride is not biologically inert. It accumulates in bone, it crosses the placenta, it reaches the developing fetal brain. Those are established toxicological principles, not speculation. You also claim fluoride is purified. That statement is inaccurate when discussing fluorosilicic acid used in many fluoridation systems. FSA is diluted to a specific concentration, but it is not purified. Calcium fluoride is a naturally occurring mineral. Fluorosilicic acid is an industrial byproduct captured from the wet scrubber systems of phosphate fertilizer production. That is simply its industrial origin. This does not automatically determine safety, but dismissing concerns about sourcing and composition is ridiculous misinformation, is itself scientifically careless. Fluorosilicic acid can contain trace amounts such as lead, arsenic, aluminum, and radionuclides depending on the source material and processing. Regulatory arguments typically rely on dilution thresholds, but that introduces a separate logical issue. Hazardous industrial materials often become acceptable only after being sufficiently diluted into public drinking water systems. This is not a conspiracy claim. This is regulatory design. You also framed skepticism towards fluoridation as part of a broader anti-science movement. Skepticism is not anti-science. Science advances through skepticism. Questioning evidence quality is science. Examining methodological flaws is science. Demanding stronger causal evidence is science. Reevaluating historical assumptions in light of new data is science. Blind appeals to institutional authority are not science. Ironically, your statement repeatedly relied on appeals to authority, peer review, consensus, institutions, and public trust, while offering little engagement to the methodological weaknesses in the underlying evidence base. This is not scientific reasoning, that is rhetorical framing. And there is another uncomfortable reality here. Many of the strongest defenders of fluoridation operate within institutional ecosystems that have long-standing professional, academic, and policy investments in the practice itself. That does not imply bad intent, but it does create structural bias, something any serious scientist should acknowledge. History shows repeatedly that scientific consensus can persist long after underlying assumptions are weakened or overturned, particularly when embedded in institutions. Scientific consensus is not infallible, it is provisional. And perhaps the most important issue of all of this: fluoride is not an essential nutrient. There is no fluoride deficiency disease. debate is not whether fluoride has biological activity, it clearly does. The debate is whether chronic, population wide systemic exposure through drinking water provides benefit that clearly outweighs the risk in modern exposure environments. That question remains scientifically and ethically contested despite decades of messaging suggesting otherwise. So, no, Nina, the issue here is not that people have forgotten science. The issue is that many have mistaken institutional repetition for scientific certainty. Real science welcomes scrutiny. Real science tolerates dissent. Real science does not require agreement as a prerequisite for legitimacy. And real scientific literacy requires the humility to recognize that even highly educated individuals can develop blind spots when they become too aligned with a dominant public health narrative. Thank you.